On this Make It Once video, on to the fun stuff. Well, if you consider old dirty Volvo engines fun anyway. It's really loud again. In my neighborhood, there's always gardeners and dogs barking and cars zooming down the street. So, pardon the noise. But here we are in the engine bay, onto the fun stuff. I already got at least one brake working, so I know I can probably stop. With the handbrake and the front caliper, that should be enough to just kind of get it around the street, no problem. If you're like me, you've seen all those videos of, will it run, you know, and then some of the videos are actually legit and has been sitting in a junkyard and you got to use some mad skills to get things running. But sometimes it's like, oh, it's been sitting in my garage for 6 years. Will it run? And then you find out they've, you know, prepped it okay and lubed it up before they put it into storage, and it's just a matter of cleaning it up and then, you know, a hard start. And you're like, yes, I did it. So this car really has been sitting a long time. But the engine is in good shape. Before I bought it, the owner, the guy that saved it, actually started it up for me. It ran and idled pretty smooth, but it has some issues. So I do have to go through some things. And the issue isn't will it run. I know it'll run. It's a Volvo. Come on. But it's how long will it run after I get it started? How much damage does it have? And how long am I going to keep it running in this condition? I don't think it needs to be rebuilt unless there's something majorly wrong. So I'm going to do everything in my power to get this going slowly and with as little damage as possible, so that I can just repair the stuff I can do without pulling the whole engine out. So, but there are some major concerns here. And the first thing that I'm concerned about is that it's missing. You know, I checked the oil level and all the oil is drained into the pan. So there's no engine oil in the block at all. And furthermore, if we look into the valve cover of the valve train, you can see that's all gunked up in there. So that's kind of bad news. And the oil quality there looks bad. But it did run, and I think that's kind of superfluous. I'm going to have to take the valve cover off eventually and see if I can clean up that a little bit. But as long as some new oil gets in there, maybe I'll put a little bit of synthetic oil once I kind of get it running once. That should kind of clean up the gunk, get it into the pan, and then, you know, after a couple of changes, you'll get rid of it. So I'm not super concerned with that. But I am concerned with the fact that the cylinder walls don't have any lube anymore. So I just read about it, a neat little trick, using this fogging oil. I didn't know it existed before. It's usually used to put cars into storage, but the trick is that we can spray some down the spark plug holes into the cylinder, and then kind of rotate the engine a little bit, and that'll lube up the walls just enough to keep the piston rings from doing any more damage or cracking if they're dry completely. So I'm going to do that in a moment. So that's number one, is that when I get it cranking again, I don't want anything to be damaged inside, so we got to lube everything up again. Second thing is going to be clean fuel. When I saw the guy start it up, there was some old fuel in the tank. It'd been sitting there for a couple years. He had put a little bit in it to kind of get it away from this garage where he saved it from. And he forgot to drain it. So when I was there, he unplugged the fuel line right here, and he was just kind of pouring fuel down into the carbs directly, and he forgot there was fuel in the back. So once we got it started and the fuel pump was kicking over, it was actually really funny. I was sitting in the car cranking it, and then I was looking over. As soon as I looked over, a geyser of fuel was like shooting out of the fuel pump. So we had to shut it down, and fuel went all over the side. So he said he was going to drain the fuel. I'm going to have to double check that. I'll just, pull off the fuel line and put up my little fuel transfer pump and see if I can pump anything. If it's dry, then it's cool. I'll just put some new fuel in. A couple gallons should be enough for all this. And then I'm going to put another fuel filter in line ahead of the pump and loop it around on itself, so that if there's any crud in the fuel tank, especially if it's dried out, there might be some loose sediment, rust, whatever, that might come down the fuel line. So I want to capture that before it gets into the fuel pump and the fuel or the carbs. So that's number two, clean fuel. And then the third thing, which is quite a bit more concerning, which could be end of day for the project, at least until, I rebuild or whatever. When I saw him start it up, I had checked all the levels. He put new transmission fluid, he put new oil in it, and he put new coolant in the system. So when I checked it and we looked at it together, the coolant was green. He had just dumped it in on top. But that little bit of cranking that we did together must have flushed the system. And check that out now. That is really not a good sign. So the fuel coolant system is completely rusty. It's a mess in there, so I'm gonna have to flush that. Hopefully it's just surface rust, it's not clogged up anywhere. And I've actually read you can even put in some evaporust in the engine, run it for a couple of minutes, let it cool off, right? Get it up to that perfect temperature to derust, and then drain it and put fluid back in, and you can actually get rid of a lot of rust and stop it before it becomes a big problem. And then the second thing is it's all crusty inside, so I'm gonna have to replace the hoses, the radiator hoses, top and bottom. I'm gonna see if you can hear this. So that's not a good sign. It's all crusty inside, and I don't think it's the hose. The hose still is pretty pliable, but it's crunchy in there, so which means that it dried out and then it was refilled. So there's old coolant crystals and glycerin or whatever is in there, so that means I'm gonna have to flush it more. And another trick is to pull the thermostat, fill up the radiator with some flush, pull it out completely, run the engine for a little bit without the thermostat so it's flushing before it even warms up, and then pull it off, flush it out again, then put a new thermostat back in, so that to make sure that you're flushing, because you can run the engine and it doesn't necessarily mean the thermostat's opened enough to actually flush the engine block. So we've got a few things to do there. So getting to pulling the spark plugs out, I actually went through my grandpa's old toolbox and I found this really cool tool. Pretty simple. At first I thought, oh, that's cool, and then I looked inside. It's a spark plug remover, but it's nice because it has a little swivel on it. It's just the right length. You don't have to piece it together. It looks like it's in pretty good shape, so a nice easy tool to kind of do this. All right, so I'm going to take the plugs out one by one to spray some fogging oil in there. So I'm not really sure what this stuff is, so I'm just going to spray a little bit on the paper towel here and see what happens. Okay, so it's like a foam oil, not so much fogging. They've been sitting, I never took the plugs out before, so they may be stuck. But at first I'm going to try my grandpa's old, quick move removal tool, and move up to the bigger ones if they are stuck. So let's pull that one. We'll just take number one off first. Also, take a look. Okay, I'm pushing that stuck. So use this one. So we get a little bit more. There we go. 3. Let's take a look at this. So that's a little bit wet. That looks pretty bad, so it'll need new plugs eventually. Try this stuff out. Maybe 1 or 2 seconds squirt. 1000 to 1000. And just go down the row. So before I turn the engine over, I'm just going to make sure that I get it into neutral. Park, reverse. Oh, the little gauge is not working. Neutral. Pull the handbrake. I don't want the car rolling away. So now I'm going to get a socket down on the crank bolt. Just turn it over a little bit. It's in neutral, so I shouldn't be turning the transmission at all. So that's probably probably pretty good. Just a little bit, just to get it moved around. And so now I don't have to worry too much about damaging the engine when I go to crank it up, and the engine should be lubed.